I remember the first time I saw one of those letters. It was an ordinary Tuesday, the kind where the sun barely peeks through the heavy clouds, casting a gloomy shadow over our little town. I was walking back from the local diner, my mind on the mundane task of paying the electricity bill, when I noticed Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who lived alone, standing in her doorway, her face ashen, clutching an envelope. The envelope was old, yellowed at the edges, and sealed with wax. The handwriting was elegant, almost too perfect, like something out of another era. Mrs. Henderson, usually so composed, looked shaken. "It's addressed to my husband," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But he's been gone for over 30 years. That was the beginning. Over the next few weeks, more letters appeared. Each one was addressed to someone who no longer lived in our town, or in some cases, no longer lived at all. The postman, old Mr. Jenkins, who had seen more of this town's history than anyone else, was the first to notice the pattern. The addresses didn't match the current residents, and the dates on the postmarks were from decades ago. Here is the continuation of the story. Disappearances started subtly. At first, it was just whispers in the grocery store or hushed conversations at the local bar. Mrs. Henderson was the first to go missing. Her house was found empty, the door left slightly ajar, and that eerie letter still on the doorstep. I, Xenia, a journalist with a penchant for uncovering the truth, couldn't help but be drawn into the mystery. My days were filled with routine, coffee at the diner, chasing leads for my articles, and now, this peculiar case. I remember thinking it was just another story to write, something to break the monotony of small-town life. Mr. Jenkins, with his weathered face and eyes that had seen too much, approached me one afternoon. "Xenia," he said, his voice low. "These letters, they're not just old mail. They're connected to that old house on the outskirts, the one that's been abandoned for as long as I can remember." I nodded, intrigued but not yet alarmed. "What about the house, Mr. Jenkins?" "It belonged to a man named Samuel Whitlock, left town under a cloud of suspicion after some incidents. Murders, they said, but nothing was ever proven. Those letters, they're all addressed to people who were somehow tied to him or his family." That evening, I sat in my small, cluttered office, surrounded by stacks of old newspapers and dusty books, trying to piece together the history of Samuel Whitlock. My research was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Sarah, a teenager from down the street, her eyes wide with fear. "Xenia, have you seen Tommy? He didn't come home last night, and there was a letter on our doorstep this morning." The pattern was becoming clearer, more sinister. The letters were not just relics of the past. They were omens of something darker. I promised Sarah I'd look into it, my heart sinking with the realization that this was no longer just a story. It was becoming personal. The next day, I visited the site of the old Whitlock house. The structure was dilapidated, windows broken, and the garden overgrown, but there was an undeniable air of foreboding. I took photos, made notes, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Yet. Back in town, the atmosphere was tense. People were locking their doors earlier, and the whispers of fear grew louder. I decided to delve deeper, not just for the story, but for the safety of my neighbors, my friends. The local sheriff, a man named Bill, had always been somewhat dismissive of the town's rumors and legends. But now, even he couldn't ignore the pattern. He agreed to meet me at the diner, his usual spot for pie and coffee, now turned into an impromptu war room. "Bill," I started, sliding into the booth across from him. "We need to take this seriously. These disappearances, they're not random. They're connected to the Whitlock family." He sighed, pushing his pie away. "I've been looking into it, Xenia. But without evidence, my hands are tied. We can't just go digging up the past without something concrete." That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I couldn't wait for official channels, not when people were disappearing. I started interviewing the townsfolk, piecing together stories from those who remembered Samuel Whitlock. Each tale was darker than the last, painting a picture of a man whose influence was as pervasive as it was malevolent. One evening, after a long day of interviews, I received a call from an unknown number. The voice was distorted, almost mechanical. "Stop digging, Xenia. Some secrets are meant to stay buried." The line went dead before I could respond. Chills ran down my spine, but instead of deterring me, it fueled my resolve. I knew I was on the right track. The next morning, I found another letter, this one addressed to me. It was placed under my windshield wiper, the handwriting eerily familiar. It read, "You're getting too close. Leave it alone, or you'll join them." Fear was a constant companion now, but so was determination. I shared the letter with Bill, who finally seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. "We'll increase patrols around the old house," he said, his voice firm. "And I'll look into any records we might have on Whitlock." The tension in town was palpable. People were scared, and trust was fraying. I felt isolated, with only a few allies like Sarah, who had become a sort of assistant in my investigation, and Bill, whose skepticism was slowly turning into concern. One night, under the cover of darkness, I decided to return to the Whitlock house alone. Armed with a flashlight and a small camera, I navigated through the overgrown path. The house loomed like a specter, its silhouette against the moonlit sky almost menacing. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the stench of decay. I moved cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. In a room that must have once been a study, I found an old diary, its pages brittle. The entries were sporadic, written in a hurried, almost frantic script. They spoke of a pact, of secrets kept to protect the town's reputation, of sacrifices made in the name of silence. As I flipped through the pages, a floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, but there was no one. The silence was suffocating, the darkness pressing in. I took the diary and left, feeling eyes on me the entire way back. Back home, I pored over the diary. It confirmed my worst fears. The town had covered up the murders to protect itself, and now someone was seeking vengeance. But who? And how were they connected to the letters? The next day, I shared my findings with Bill. His face was grim. "We need to find this person before they strike again," he said. "But we have to be careful. If they're as connected as you say, they could be anyone." The investigation was now a race against time. Each day brought new challenges, more disappearances, cryptic warnings, and the growing fear that I might be next. Yet, with each obstacle, my resolve hardened. I was not just fighting for a story. I was fighting for my town, for justice, and for the truth that had been buried for far too long. The pre-climactic scene unfolds with an eerie silence blanketing the town. The sun had set hours ago, and the only light came from the dim street lamps casting long shadows across the empty streets. I, Xenia, felt the weight of the town's fear pressing down on me as I walked back to my office, the diary from the Whitlock house tucked securely under my arm. As I approached my office, the air felt charged, like the calm before a storm. I noticed the door was slightly ajar, which was odd because I always locked it. My heart raced, but I pushed it open, stepping into the darkness, my hand reaching for the light switch. The room flickered to life, revealing a figure sitting at my desk, their back to me. "Bill?" I called out, my voice betraying my nervousness. The figure turned slowly, and it wasn't Bill. It was an elderly woman, her face etched with lines of sorrow and secrets. "No, Xenia," she said, her voice a whisper. "I'm Evelyn Whitlock, Samuel's sister." I froze, the name sending a chill through me. You're supposed to be dead," I managed to say, my mind racing through the implications. Evelyn's eyes were hollow, haunted. "I've been watching you, Xenia. You're digging up the past, stirring things that should remain buried." "Why are you here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. To warn you, to stop you. The letters, the disappearances, they're not just about vengeance. They're about protection. This town has a pact, one that was made to keep the truth hidden, to keep us all safe. I stepped closer, the diary still clutched in my hand. Safe from what? What truth? Evelyn's gaze hardened. From the truth that would tear this town apart. The truth about Samuel, about the murders, about the pact. I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. People are disappearing, Evelyn. How can that be protection? She sighed, her eyes drifting to the window, as if looking for answers in the darkness outside. Samuel was not just a murderer. He was a scapegoat. The town needed someone to blame, someone to sacrifice to maintain the illusion of peace. The pact was made to cover up the real culprits, to keep the town's dark history buried. My mind raced, connecting dots. So, these letters, they're from someone trying to expose the truth? Evelyn nodded slowly. Yes, my nephew Daniel. He believes justice must be served, even if it means destroying everything we've built here. He's been sending those letters, orchestrating the disappearances to draw attention, to force the town to confront its past. And the house? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Demolished, she said. We thought by erasing the physical reminder, we could erase the memory. But memories, like secrets, have a way of resurfacing. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in with the weight of the revelation. Where is Daniel now? He's here, in this town, watching, waiting. He's not just seeking revenge. He's seeking redemption for his family's name. The door to my office creaked open, and there stood Daniel, his face a mirror of Evelyn's, but with a fire in his eyes that spoke of vengeance. He held a letter in his hand, the same elegant script on the envelope. Xenia, he said, his voice calm yet chilling. You've been a catalyst, whether you intended it or not. You've brought us to this moment. I stared at Daniel, the pieces of the puzzle snapping into place. So you're behind all this? He nodded, his gaze unwavering. I am, but not for the reasons you might think. I'm not the monster here, Xenia. I'm the one trying to right the wrongs that have festered for decades. Evelyn's voice was soft, almost pleading. Daniel, this isn't the way. We've lived with this secret for so long to protect everyone. Protect? Daniel's voice rose, filled with frustration and determination. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment if you enjoyed this story. This will help us create more engaging stories for you.